Okay, so let's go. Actually, one pre-step, which a friend of mine said, Robin, you've got a tendency to jump too quickly into the technical details. Let's take one step back and say, what is propensity to cycle? Because it's one of those terms that you can throw around, and it's worth defining that early on and to talk about what the tool actually does for people who are new to it. And by the way, there's an article describing it in the handout packs. There's this Get Britain Cycling magazine, so it's described in much more detail there, so I'm not going to go into detail. But essentially, propensity to cycle, really it's about the future potential, and we're talking about relatively long-term potential. If you remove the cultural and infrastructural constraints that there are on cycling, what could cycling look like based on current trip patterns? So we're very much building on existing travel behaviour and saying which existing trips that are not cycled could be cycled. That's our definition. So let's check it out and see what it does. I might have to plug in a mouse because it's a bit tricky to do, but essentially we decided to put a front page map on there that just shows the current level of cycling. There's also a test version of this map that we've put together that shows what the rate of cycling in these in the different regions of England would be under the Go Dutch scenarios and different scenarios. But you can see, basically overall in England we've got a low level of cycling. We know that, but it's useful to be able to start off with that front page. Is this mouse going to work? Possibly not. Researching, ready to use. Okay, won't worry about the mouse. So, this isn't the tool, this is just front page map, and you can click on a zone, and this is running now for, it's a live link, so anyone can go on there and use it. I'm going to do it for West Yorkshire, because it's a place I know quite well, being based in Leeds, and it starts off with an overview of what the current rate of cycling is. So it's very explicitly building on existing data. We're not making anything up, we're not doing any modelling at this stage, we're just displaying, we're visualising existing data. And I think there's a fair argument to suggest that what's on the map here is the most high geographical resolution data that we have on cycling behaviour. It's this 2011 census that has got a very high penetration. 90% of the population fill out the census, roughly a half of people commute, so this is actually high quality data. We hope to add more data sets to it, but we're just going to use the best available data at the given moment in time, and at the moment that's the 2011 census. We're in conversations about getting new data sets such as those derived from mobile phone traces, but that's a different story. So to run through very quickly what you can do with this, you can see that the yellow area in the north of Leeds is got a high rate of cycling. It doesn't really give you any idea of where they're going. So at this stage, not massively innovative or useful to a transport planner. So what we can do is actually look at where these cyclists are going. So if you didn't know Leeds, you might think that the people in the yellow area are kind of just going out in all different directions. In fact, they're not. There's a very strong centre of gravity in Leeds city centre, and you can see that the spatial structure of this city is very monocentric. It's pulling people towards it. And you can actually see, furthermore, that there's just a huge bias in the cycling pattern in this city towards the north of the city. When I first saw this, I almost thought there was something wrong with the model. I thought, I don't quite know what's going on here, what's going on with the south. But in fact, having cycled through the south of the city, you can kind of get an indication as to why. It's not a very friendly place to cycle. So that's the current situation. Just a very quick thing on the tech, we can allocate that to the transport network. So this is using cyclestreets.net routing algorithm, which was developed by cyclists for cyclists. And that's the fastest route. We can also show the fastest and quietest routes, which is useful for indicating where maybe there's opportunity for making the quiet route more direct. And I'll have an example of that later on. You can you can remove the zone, so you can zoom into specific roads. And you can also have different base maps on there, like the satellite map is really useful for letting you know if there's room for space reallocation away from cars, for example, how many lanes are on there. But I'm going to move on to possibly the most important layer in this, which is when you have all of those overlying lines, one on top of each other, what you really want to know is what the total sum of cyclists flowing down. So this looks like a little bit like a river network, where you have all of your small tributaries feeding into big rivers. And that's exactly what it does. So you can see here, and this is picked up in both the Stats 19 crash data and in Strava data and in in the screen line counts, that Otley Road here does have the highest rate of cycling, and that's what our model is kicking out just based on the origin destination data. So that's a really quick live demo, and by the way, we can do all of those visualization for each scenario of the future. So that's what we do, and we can say if we were to reach the government target of doubling the number of cycle trips, how would the spatial distribution of cycling change in this particular city? And if we click on one particular segment on the road network there, in this case it's going from 100 to 300. If we go somewhere in the south of the city where, as I said, there's currently a low rate of cycling, you can see quite large increases, whereas in Otley Road, you're not quite getting a doubling. So that shows that it's sensitive to, it's not just doubling everywhere, it's actually taking into account the trip distance distribution. So I'm going to crack on. That was the live demo, more or less done. We don't have a joined up, strategically thought out travel network. That's the motivation behind it. Roads, you've got like 10-year, 20-year planning cycles, loads of modelling going into it, yet cycling, it seems that people are just happy to draw a bit of paint on the side of the road. This tool is hoping to get beyond that and say, let's think strategically about where we want to go in the long term. So it's certainly strategic, and it's at quite a high level rather than zooming straight down to that junction level. This is a screenshot from my thesis, which is about the energy costs of commuting. I was hoping to have more time to talk about the backgrounds to the research, but instead I'm going to talk about how this came about. So I've spent a lot of time thinking and talking about ways to automate or to assist the transport planning process using data. And the original way I framed it was, wouldn't it be cool to have an algorithm that could estimate where to prioritise the next cycle path in Sheffield, where I was living at the time? If you've got so much money, where do you go next? And coincidentally, someone in the DFT seemed to be having a similar kind of thought process, because lo and behold, they put out for tender this thing called the propensity to cycle tool. I didn't actually think that we would end up bidding for it. I just sent it to a few contacts, and we came up with a methodology that said we're going to make it all open source and we're going to make it publicly accessible. So people from the Department for Transport obviously thought this was quite exciting, and that's how it started just over a year ago. And I'm going to skip to the timeline in a bit, but basically we got together a group of people from 3 different universities, well 4 if you include Anna, and this is who's working on it. So again, to save time, I'm not going to go through the CVs of each person on there, but the point is we've got a diverse team, and I think when you're doing transport modelling, it's a whole kind of process and a community that's using your models, not just the technical side. So we've got very technical people on there, but we've also got people who are interested in policy and implementation, and also about what the impacts of cycling are. And that multidisciplinary approach is key to the propensity to cycle tool. So how does it work? So it's not magic, we're just using existing data, and the key data source for this are these lines. So when we're doing the model, one of those lines is represented as a row on a table, and we're doing all the modelling based on that. Also critical to the model is this concept of distance decay. We spent a long time fitting curves to these different distance decay distributions. And just to check people are still awake, can anyone have a guess which 2 regions those are on the map? And you can see they've got quite different spatial cultures based on, this is, if you can't see, this is 2.5 kilometres, this is 5 kilometres. So you can see this region has a very high peak. Lots of people live close to where they work, and then it rapidly drops off. So any guesses? Yeah, and you can see also a clue is the current rate of cycling. So the current is this pink, and this one barely gets off the ground. This one goes woo up here, and then gradually goes down again. I should probably try and move it up a bit.
Somewhere in Cambridge.
No one said it. Like Cambridge. The other one that you'd say when Oxford, yeah. So that one's Oxford, and that one you could have guessed it's West Yorkshire because I showed it on the map earlier. In West Yorkshire, you've got a much slower distance decay curve, so that means that round about here, a lot more people are travelling this distance. That has a massive impact on who's willing to cycle to work. That's how the methodology works in layman's terms. We're doing a regression model that has non-linear terms. It also includes hilliness, but I think it's much better to explain it based on real data. And you can see the scenarios actually build on the existing trip distance distribution to say where it's going to grow.
Why would that go up in Oxford? The further away you get, the curve goes back up. I can understand it.
Here?
Yeah, I can understand the decay always coming down.
So
why would it go back up?
So this is, to be clear about what we're looking at here, this on the y-axis, I probably should have said, this is the number of trips per day, well this is the number of commutes really, number of people in the 2011 census. The reason it goes up is if you were to draw a transect through Oxford, you'd probably have, if this is a typical kind of green belt, and then you've got some kind of area on the outside of it, and to be honest, most of these guys, if you look, can't cycle. They don't think they can cycle because you're getting to the 7.5, 10 kilometre mark. But in our model, we include trips of up to 20 kilometres Euclidean distance, which in some cases is 30 kilometres on the road network. So that's a good question. We do route allocation. I've already shown this. A key thing about this is we're developing it in the open. So if anyone's technically minded, and I know at least one person in here is, you can actually kind of spy on us or check out what we're doing. And we have like wonderful, exciting conversations about which issues we need to fix. So that's available on github.com, and our group is called NPCT, which stands for the National Propensity to Cycle Tool. So we're actually moving forward and trying to get community involvement. So there's one cycle campaigner who started commenting on issues. If you are keen and you'd like to kind of contribute, just check it out there. And that's a really important part of our approach. So I mentioned the timings of this thing. So phase one, we finished that, I don't need to talk about it. What's of interest to people is that one critique, and I'm really open to critiques of any software, and no software is perfect, and I see every criticism as an opportunity. So it's not so good for rural areas because the regions get very big, and we're just starting from the centroid of a massive region, which isn't very accurate. So the way to get around that is to use smaller geographical units. That's what these LSOA areas are. So we're going to move to that level. That's not what I'm most excited about. What I'm most excited about is the travel to school data. So we can have a map showing what the potential uptake of travel to school by kids and how many kids could be cycling to school. And I think that would be a really useful tool for designing safe and healthy cities. And we are going to go for version 2 as well, which we're not going to do nationally, where we just go into more detail. And I'm not going to go into detail about the details. So I've got some bonus extras. So the DFT didn't actually commission the route network. This was just me playing around with seeing where you had all of these overlying routes, and actually asked a question out to the community, how can I solve this problem, on a forum called gis.stackexchange.com, and a guy called Barry Rowlingson, who's based at the University of Lancaster, solved this problem for me. So I'm eternally grateful to him, and people who find that layer useful should be also. Okay, how can the thing be used? How am I doing for time, by the way?
Crikey, you're well over.
Okay. It should work the other way round. I shouldn't be reminding him.
Oh, that was fascinating. Yeah.
Okay. So
there's no
I won't rush too much then, given that the chair's forgotten. So, but I won't dwell on these things. So, we can use it for strategic network planning. There's talk about the LC whip, and there's a consultation, and they've actually used the propensity to cycle tool in there, saying that this can be a way to help design your strategic network. But I don't think it should just be about where do you build new cycle paths. We've had some great talks earlier from the US about alternative interventions that you can do, potentially reallocating road space or doing experiments, just getting a bit creative. This doesn't tell you what to build, it tells you where to build. So, or not even where to build, where to intervene. So I'm not an expert on different designs for intervention, but this can certainly give you an idea. And hopefully we believe that when you overlay the current, when you know what the current provision is for cycling, with this potential layer, it will actually show where you've got a mismatch. So they're the current uses. And we can also estimate health and carbon benefit. So we've actually got data in there showing what the estimated carbon and health benefits are. So hopefully it can build a business case for your LEPs or for whatever funder. This should be useful. With further work, we could do a lot more. So we could create local builds, and I actually created a version for Leicester to show that you can do region-specific builds. But that's on my laptop, and it didn't play well with the technology here, so I'm not going to show that, probably fortunately. And we can also look at, in the future, if you build a new development, how's that going to change the story? And maybe we could crowdsource transport planning, so asking lots of people to say what scenario are they interested in. There's many options, you know. I like to think big. Could we make a global propensity to cycle tool? It's definitely technologically possible. It's just a question of whether that's a good use of time at the moment. So, final test for people. Can someone tell me where the top and the bottom are? Just to give another example of the use cases, because you can use it however you want. There's no kind of instruction manual saying you have to use it this way. It's an interactive tool, and you can play around with it.
London and Manchester?
No. So, is anyone from Leicester? Basically, I took off the layer. This is the hilliness layer. This is Leicester again, and this is Cambridge this time. So all it's showing is that here it looks like there's no blue lines. That's not true. All it is that the blue lines are the quiet paths, and the purple lines are the most direct route. And in Cambridge, fascinatingly, and in other high cycling places, often your direct, fastest route is also seen as the safest option. When you've got a big divergence, that seems to be a big barrier to cycling. So that's one other way that you can use this tool. Validation, well, I'm preempting another talk in this session, which is Strava data. So bottom, you've got Strava data. Top, you've got the propensity to cycle tool. And you can see, visually, they're not a million miles away. This isn't a quantitative test, but I think there's huge potential for actually quantitatively kind of testing it compared with screenline data. So in summary, the propensity to cycle tool provides an evidence base about where to intervene, and it doesn't necessarily pass judgment about what you can do, and I think that should be informed by debate. So because this thing's publicly accessible, hopefully it's going to encourage debate, and I believe that the more people who have access to the best available evidence leads to better decision making. So I think I've covered the other points really. We're not aiming to replace transport planners, okay? This is aiming to complement existing knowledge, and it should help get people who potentially in the past have had acrimonious relations about planning onto the same page, because you're starting with the same evidence base. So thanks a lot for listening, and look forward to questions at the end.